I saw my first dead body when I was 8 years old. It was a man lying face down in the open sewer, his arm sticking out like he was reaching for something. People gathered, talking in low voices, but no one touched him. The stench was unbearable, but no one covered their noses. In the ghetto, smells were like old neighbors, you learned to live with them. Mama didn't let me stand there for long. She dragged me back into the house, slapping my head lightly like I had done something wrong. Don't look at that. It's not your business, she said. But how could it not be my business? I had to step over that same sewer every day on my way to school. Growing up in our part of the city wasn't easy. The houses were squeezed together, their tin roofs rusting under the sun. At night, the sound of gunshots was as normal as the cries of babies. People didn't call the police when there was trouble because the police didn't come unless there was money to be made. Even then, they caused more problems than they solved. My best friend, Kofi, lived in the room next to ours. His mom sold fried plantains outside, and his dad, well, nobody talked about him. Kofi and I spent most of our days running barefoot through the narrow alleys, dodging the older boys who ran errands for the gang leaders. The older boys were always up to something, carrying small bags of powder, hiding wads of cash, or, sometimes, just sitting and watching. Their eyes always seemed empty, like they'd seen too much. One day, Kofi and I found an old football in the dump behind the church. It was torn and flat, but we patched it up with tape we stole from the market. For weeks, we played with that ball every chance we got. It felt like freedom, like there was something in this place that belonged to us. But everything in the ghetto had a price. One afternoon, while we were playing in the dusty field near the corner shop, a group of older boys came. They were the kind who didn't smile much, and when they did, it wasn't friendly. One of them grabbed our ball, held it up, and laughed. "You boys think you own this?" he asked. Kofi stood up to him. "We found it. It's ours." The boy smacked and kicked the ball hard, sending it flying into the open drain. Then he pushed Kofi so hard he fell into the dirt. I wanted to help, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear froze me in place. The older boys laughed as they walked away. Kofi didn't cry, but I could see the anger in his eyes. He wiped the dirt off his knees and pulled me by the arm. "Let's go," he said. That night, Kofi told me he was going to join them, the older boys. He said he was tired of being pushed around, tired of being nothing in a place where being nothing could kill you. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. "You'll see," he said. "One day, they'll respect me." Kofi stopped coming to school after that. I'd see him sometimes, standing with the older boys, his eyes harder than I remembered. He started wearing a new pair of sneakers, and his pockets always seemed full. But his laughter was gone. Then one morning, we woke up to screams. Mama told me to stay inside, but I couldn't. I ran out and saw a crowd gathered near the field where we used to play. Kofi was lying on the ground, his shirt soaked in blood. He wasn't moving. His new sneakers were gone. I don't remember much about what happened after that. The days blurred together. People whispered that Kofi had crossed the wrong person, that he tried to keep money that wasn't his. No one said it out loud, but we all knew the truth. In the ghetto, nothing belonged to you, not even your life. That was the day I realized the rules of our world. You could fight, you could run, or you could disappear. I decided I would find a way out. But the ghetto doesn't let go of people easily, and every step away felt like I was carrying Kofi's ghost with me. "You said. Continue." ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. After Kofi's death, everything felt different. The streets that once felt like a playground now felt like a trap. Every corner seemed to echo his name, every dark alley a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. Mama noticed the change in me. I stopped running around, stopped playing, stopped laughing. "You're too quiet these days," she said one evening, while cooking over the small charcoal stove in our room. "What's in your head?" I didn't answer her. How could I explain the fear that had wrapped itself around me? How could I tell her I was scared of ending up like Kofi, angry, desperate, and forgotten? But Mama wasn't one to let silence win. Listen, she said, her voice low but firm. This place will swallow you whole if you let it. You have to think past it. You hear me? I nodded, even though I didn't really understand what she meant. The ghetto was all I had ever known. How could I think past it when I couldn't even imagine what was outside of it? A few months after Kofi's death, a man named Mr. Ayo moved into the room next to ours. He was old, maybe in his 60s, with a limp and a quiet way of speaking. No one really knew where he came from, but he kept to himself, which made the neighbors trust him a little. One day, I saw him sitting outside, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. I was curious, but I didn't want to get too close. People in the ghetto didn't ask too many questions. But he noticed me watching. Do you want to try? He asked, holding out the small knife. I shook my head. Mama doesn't like me holding knives. He smiled a little. She's smart. But this isn't for trouble, it's for building. I didn't understand what he meant, but something about the way he said it made me sit down next to him. I watched as he walked, his hands steady and sure, turning the rough wood into something smooth and detailed. It was strange, peaceful, even. The ghetto wasn't a place for peace, but somehow, Mr. Ayo had found it in that piece of wood. Over time, I started spending more time with him. He taught me how to carve small animals and shapes, and for a while, it felt like I was creating something instead of just surviving. He told me stories, too, about growing up in a village far away, about the war that had taken his leg, about the things he had lost and the things he had found. One day, I asked him why he came to our neighborhood. Why here, of all places? He looked at me for a long time before answering. Because even here, life can grow. It wasn't until much later that I realized what he meant. The ghetto tried to kill hope, but it never succeeded completely. It was in the small things, the women who braided hair and laughed like they didn't have a care in the world, the boys who played football with plastic bottles, the old men who sat under trees, sharing stories from their youth. Life was stubborn, even here. I started carving more seriously. I sold small pieces at the market, wooden birds, lions, and fish. People didn't pay much, but it was something. And every time someone handed me a few coins for something I had made with my own hands, it felt like a small victory. By the time I was 15, I had saved enough to start going to a trade school on the other side of the city. It wasn't easy, waking up at dawn, walking for miles, sitting in a classroom where I felt out of place. But it was better than staying. Every lesson, every day, felt like a step towards something bigger, something better. I never forgot Kofi. Sometimes, I'd sit in the field where we used to play and think about him, about the dreams he never got to chase, the life he never got to live.
I carved a small statue of him once, with his gap-toothed smile and his favorite torn shirt. It sat on a shelf in our room, a reminder of why I had to keep going. Years later, when I finally left the ghetto for good, I carried Kofi's memory with me. I carried the lessons Mama had taught me, the skills Mr. Ayo had given me, the resilience the streets had forced into my bones. The ghetto never let go of people easily, but it didn't hold me forever. And every time I look at the scars it left behind, I remind myself, I survived. And that, in itself, is a kind of freedom. When I finally moved out of the ghetto, it wasn't to some fancy house or a rich neighborhood. It was just a small, shared room closer to the trade school where I was learning to carve furniture. But it felt like a world away. The air smelled cleaner, the streets were quieter, and for the first time, I didn't have to sleep with one ear open, waiting for a fight or a scream in the night. But leaving didn't mean forgetting. The ghetto had a way of staying with you. It wasn't just the memories of Kofi or the other kids who didn't make it. It was the noise, the struggle, the way life never felt certain. Even in my new place, I caught myself jumping at loud noises or clutching my small bag of tools like someone was about to snatch it. One evening, I went back to visit Mama. She still lived in the same cramped room with the same leaky roof. The neighbors were mostly the same, though a few faces had disappeared, replaced by others who looked just as tired. Mama welcomed me with a tight hug and a bowl of yam porridge, just like she always did. "You're looking better," she said, studying my face as I ate. "The city suits you." "It's quieter," I said. "But I miss home sometimes." She laughed, a short, dry laugh. "This place. Home. No one misses this." I didn't argue. She was right, in a way. No one really wanted to stay in the ghetto. But living wasn't easy either. It was like pulling a tree out of the ground, some roots always stayed behind. As the years passed, my carving improved. I started making bigger pieces, tables, chairs, even small cabinets. My clients were mostly middle-class people who liked the authentic look of handmade furniture. I didn't mind. Their money kept me afloat, and their praise gave me confidence. One day, I got a call from a man I'd met at a market. He said he had seen one of my pieces and wanted to order a custom design for his office. "Come by," he said, giving me an address in the rich part of town. "I'll show you what I need." When I arrived, the house was like nothing I'd ever seen: tall gates, polished floors, walls covered in art. The man, Mr. Mensah, was kind but distant. He walked me through his office, explaining how he wanted a desk that was unique, something that stands out. As I took notes, I felt a pang of doubt. What was I doing here, in a place like this? Did I really belong? But then I thought of Kofi, of Mama, of Mr. Ayo and his quiet wisdom. They had all believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. "You can do it?" Mr. Mensah asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I can do it." The desk took me 2 months to complete. I poured everything into it: long nights, careful details, every lesson I'd learned since the days of carving small wooden birds with Mr. Ayo. When I delivered it to Mr. Mensah, he ran his hand over the polished wood and nodded. "This," he said, "is more than I expected. You've got talent." It was a simple compliment, but it meant the world to me. That one desk led to more orders, word spread, and soon I was working with people I never thought I'd even meet. But I didn't forget where I came from. Every few months, I went back to the ghetto to visit Mama, to see the old streets, to remind myself why I worked so hard. I started hiring young boys from the neighborhood to help me with small tasks: sanding, polishing, delivering. Kids like Kofi, who just needed a chance. One of the boys I hired was named Junior. He reminded me of Kofi, skinny, bold, with a sharp tongue that could cut through even the toughest of insults. Junior was 12 when I met him, standing outside a corner shop where I used to buy candies as a kid. He was playing with a bottle cap, kicking it like a football, his clothes tattered but his spirit unbroken. Something about him caught my attention. "Do you want to learn how to work with wood?" I asked him. He looked at me, skeptical. "Why? You trying to make me your servant?" I laughed. "No. I'm offering you a job. You learn something and learn something." Junior shrugged, like he didn't care, but the next morning, he showed up at my small workshop, ready to work. At first, he was restless, easily bored. He'd stand for a few minutes, then wander off to touch tools he wasn't supposed to, or sit and stare out the window. But slowly, as the weeks passed, he got the hang of it. His hands, rough from the streets, began to grow steady. His curiosity turned into focus. One day, as we worked on a small table for a client, Junior asked me, "How did you learn all this?" I paused, thinking about Mr. Ayo, about the wood carvings, about all the nights I spent dreaming of something better. "Someone took the time to teach me," I said. "I just want to pass it on." Junior nodded, as if he understood more than I expected him to. "I want to be like you," he said quietly. "I want to leave this place too." The years rolled by, and my business grew. I moved into a bigger workshop, hired more boys and girls from the ghetto, and started teaching them not just how to carve wood but how to see beyond the walls of the neighborhood that tried to cage them. For many of them, it was the first time anyone told them they could be more than what the streets had to offer. But it wasn't always easy. Some of the kids disappeared, lured back by the promises of quick money from the gangs. Others left because they didn't believe in themselves. I couldn't save everyone, and that was a hard truth to accept. One day, Junior didn't show up for work. I searched for him everywhere, in the alleys, the fields, the places we both knew too well. When I finally found him, he was sitting on a broken bench, staring at the ground. His face was swollen, his lip bleeding. What happened? I asked, kneeling beside him. I tried to fight back, he said, his voice shaking. They wanted me to sell something for them. I said no. My chest tightened. I knew exactly what he was talking about. The gangs didn't take rejection lightly. You did the right thing, I said. But you can't fight them alone. You have to stay close, stay safe. Junior nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The ghetto didn't let go of people easily. I knew that better than anyone. It wasn't until much later, when I opened my first storefront in the city, that I felt like I had truly broken free. The shop wasn't big, but it was mine, a place where my work could be seen, where my story could be told. The first time Mama visited, she walked through the door, her eyes wide with wonder. You've done well, my son, she said, her voice trembling. Better than I ever dreamed. I smiled, but there was a lump in my throat. It's not just for me, Mama. It's for all of us. I kept a small corner in the shop for carvings from the kids I trained. Junior's work was there, a wooden lion so detailed it looked like it could roar. He'd come a long way since that first day in the workshop, and I couldn't have been prouder. One evening, as I locked up the shop, I saw a young boy standing outside, staring through the glass. His face was dirty, his clothes torn. He reminded me of Kofi, of Junior, of myself. I opened the door and stepped out. Do you want to come inside? I asked. The boy hesitated, then nodded. He walked in, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the carvings, the smell of wood and varnish. What's your name? I asked. Sammy, he said. Sammy, I repeated. Do you want to learn how to work with wood? His eyes lit up, just for a moment, before doubt crept in. Why? What's the point? Please subscribe and like my channel for interesting stories. I crouched down to his level. Because where you're standing right now, I stood once too. And someone gave me a chance. Now it's my turn to give you one. The ghetto is not just a place, it's a mindset, a cycle that tries to crush hope. But even in the darkest corners, seeds of life can grow if they are nurtured with patience, opportunity, and belief. Sometimes, all it takes to change a life is a single act of kindness, a hand extended in faith. I couldn't save everyone, but for those I could, I became the proof that escape was possible, and that the scars of the past could become the foundation of a brighter future. Because in the end, it's not just about leaving the ghetto, it's about making sure others can live too. Over the years, the little workshop I started grew into something much bigger. It wasn't just a furniture business anymore, it was a movement. Word spread that I was taking kids from the streets, giving them skills, and helping them build lives they didn't think were possible. People began to take notice, journalists, local leaders, even international organizations. They called me a community change maker, a title that felt strange at first, but one I eventually learned to wear with pride. Junior stayed with me the longest. By the time he was 20, he was no longer the wide-eyed boy I'd met kicking a bottle cap. He had become a master craftsman, better than even I was in some ways. He started teaching the younger kids who came to the workshop, sharing his story as a way to inspire them. But Junior wanted more. One day, he came to me and said, "Boss, I want to start my own workshop." Not here. Back home. I stared at him, unsure how to feel. Back in the ghetto. He nodded, his face serious. Yes. If I don't go back, who will? There are kids there, just like me, waiting for a chance. Please don't forget to subscribe and like my channel for interesting stories. I knew he was right. It was the same feeling I had when I started, wanting to reach back, to pull others out. But I also knew how dangerous it could be. Are you sure? I asked. It won't be easy. He smiled, the same bold, fearless smile I had seen all those years ago. Nothing worth doing ever is. Junior's workshop became a beacon of hope in the ghetto. He hired kids who would have otherwise ended up in gangs, taught them the craft, and gave them something to believe in. I visited him often, walking through the streets that still felt like they had eyes watching from every shadow. But seeing what he was building, how he was changing lives, made every risk worth it. One day, he told me about a boy named Sefer. He's got potential, Junior said. But he's stubborn, just like I was. When I met Sefer, I saw the same fire in his eyes that I had seen in Junior's and, before that, in Kofi's. He was rough around the edges, but he was learning. Slowly, he began to open up, trusting Junior, trusting the process. As the years passed, the ripple effect grew. Junior's workshop inspired others to start similar projects in different parts of the city. People began to see the ghetto not just as a place of despair but as a place of untapped potential. Leaders came to the community, asking how they could help. Schools and training centers were built, giving kids options beyond the streets. But the ghetto didn't change overnight. It still had its darkness, poverty, crime, corruption. Not everyone made it out. Sefer, the boy Junior had high hopes for, was killed in a gang fight just weeks after turning 16. When Junior told me, his voice cracked, and I could feel the weight of it in my chest. Do you think we're even making a difference? Junior asked me one evening as we sat outside his workshop. Kids like Sefer, it feels like we're fighting a losing battle. I looked at him, thinking about Kofi, about all the kids we couldn't save. We won't save everyone, I said. But for the ones we do, it matters. It always matters. One day, years later, I stood outside my first storefront, looking at the sign above the door, Roots and Branches. The name felt right. The ghetto was my root, where I came from, what shaped me. But the branches were everything that grew from it, the lives changed, the dreams realized, the futures built. Junior walked up to me, now a grown man, his hands calloused from years of work. Boss, he said, smiling. We did good, didn't we? I nodded, my heart full. We did. He held out a small carving, a bird, just like the one Mr. Ao had made for me all those years ago. For you, he said. A reminder. I took it, running my fingers over the smooth wood. Thank you. As Junior walked away, I stood there for a long time, staring at the carving. The bird felt like a symbol of everything we had built: freedom, resilience, hope. It reminded me that even in the darkest places, life could grow. All it needed was a chance. The final truth is this: the ghetto doesn't define you, but it can shape you. It can break you or build you, depending on how you fight back. The cycle doesn't end with one person, it ends with a chain of people who choose to break it, one life at a time. And as long as there are hands willing to reach out, willing to teach, willing to believe, there will always be hope. Hope is stubborn, just like we are. And sometimes, that's enough. Please comment below what's your experience like or what you think. Thank you for watching.